Well, good afternoon, and I'll try not to walk around too much since I guess we're on live stream now. Thanks for coming this afternoon. A little worried at about 10 after where there were about 4 people in the room, so I'm glad we didn't overplan with the Great Hall or anything, but thanks for being here. And we're planning just to have a few slides. We have quite a few. We might just have a few. We'll see how much interest there is. But just wanted to give an overview about some things that have been things that have come up recently and might be questions. And then most of the time we're looking to just leaving it open to the audience for questions. So some of you may be aware that we are searching for a new chancellor, and that process is continuing today. The interviews at System are actually happening today, and the announcement is planned for the Board of Regents meeting December 5th and 6th, so coming up soon. A number of people on campus, including myself, will be very interested to find out when the new chancellor is starting, and hopefully we'll get that information as well about it at the same time. We've also obviously been working on budget-related issues, and currently there is a survey that hopefully you're aware of regarding campus-wide feedback about budget items, and that will continue through the 22nd. CAC will be reviewing the feedback, and we're working with Park to bring that together so that there'll be an opportunity for review. We're also collecting feedback from chairs and other unit leaders, and we're looking at that probably being part of the review process with CAC at the mid-December meeting that's scheduled. And then during January, we may end up having CAC back in action in January to have one further run through, and by Red Book time in late February, early March, having the reductions put into Red Book and be part of the plan for next year. And then the final thing that I was going to mention, and then Phil's going to take over for the next few slides, but a voluntary separation incentive program was sent out last week, and individuals who were eligible did receive additional information regarding the voluntary separations. I think the key thing that I'll mention among the key points here are that it is entirely voluntary, and that the number of voluntary separations will be limited, that we would be looking to have a substantial reduction in cost associated with any voluntary separation, and so that would limit the number that we would be able to accept. The process, from what I understand, is very formulaic in terms of the dates. So there's a notification date in mid-January, and then employment would have to terminate by the end of May for people who are taking the voluntary separations. And then Phil, I think you're up next. Phil has a few details for those of you who are interested in budget details.
I was just noticing on the slide here that it seems like a badly dubbed movie, doesn't it? So my lips move, but it's not quite the words that are coming out. Yeah. So at least that will be distracting. So over the last couple of weeks, when I sent the email out with some of the budget cut information, I had a lot of questions that are coming back. And so the purpose now is that I'm going to take a few of those questions and go over them very quickly. Some of those questions were from folks in the room. And I'm going to give very brief answers, and then really it's an open forum. We're going to take Q&A and want to spend quite a bit of time with that. Now, what you're going to see up on the PowerPoint is a very wordy explanation, and feel free to read that. I'm going to give the very quick yes, no, kind of the cliff notes of the answer, and I'm going to probably fly through these fairly quickly. I might spend a little bit more time on one or two of these slides. So the first question really is about DINs, and can I cut money that's earmarked for a DIN? And the answer to that is yes. DINs were set-aside monies that system earmarked for a specific purpose, but some years ago, they block funded those back to the institution, and we're not tracking those anymore. So they are cuttable. The second question is about tech fee money. Tech fee money is 102, but it's not base funds. So somebody asked, I have tech money that's in my account and it's in the 4 and the 10%. Should I be cutting that? And the answer to that is no. You shouldn't be cutting that, nor should you be including that as a part of your cut, because it's not base funded. Each year, that committee allocates those funds. The third question is about positions in fringe, and I think that this has been pretty well communicated, but it's got some nuances to it, and that is, if I eliminate a position, can I capture fringe? And the answer to that question is yes, but it depends on how you reduce that position. So if you reduce that position and you want to keep that FTE in your department, then you can take a 15.75 additional reduction on top of the salary that you're cutting. If you've decided that you're going to completely give that FTE back to the department, meaning that we're going to give it back to system, and that lowers our ceiling for what we have available in our fringe pool, then you can actually take an additional 38%, or it's a little bit higher, 38.17%. So that's an additional savings that you take in addition to the salary. Moving a 102 position is another kind of nuance to that fringe question. So you have a position on 102, and you're going to move that to most commonly a 131 fund. It happens quite a bit with the customized instruction. So when you cut that 102 position, you can choose to take that 15% or that 38%, but that position that you move over to 131, 128 is then going to have an additional fringe charge on top of that. So you're going to have to account for the fringe and the salary when you decide to move it over to another funding string. And since that's not a pooled fringe, it's going to be on actuals. So you're going to have to do some guesstimate budgeting. This is a little bit more complicated question, and this is probably the question that we've received the most. And that is, I cannot fill out this form without indicating or giving away a very specific position. And I want to be sensitive to the folks in my department, and I really would like to know who's going to see this. It's an exercise, I understand that, but I can't really do this exercise without putting down that this particular job is not going to be done anymore, and that is directly traceable to this one person. So how do I do that? And the answer to that is try to do your best. It's an exercise. We want to figure out if there's ability to reduce salary, and if we reduce salary, what are those tasks and those activities that we're not going to be doing anymore? And I understand that it might be attached to a position, and these narratives will go to the CAC. So now in that narrative that is given to the CAC, it's going to be desensitized and scrubbed a bit. So what you're going to be seeing is what activities aren't in what the CAC will be seeing is activities. We really want to stay away from names. We understand the sensitivity of what's going on here, and it is an exercise. So this. I have had this question from my own folks, and it's probably the most common question, and I get it. So number 6 is about revenue generation, and I've got ideas on what we can do with revenue generating. Can I take that money that I have planned that we would earn, and can I apply that against a cut? And the answer is we would love to know about ways to generate more money. But the exercise really is to reduce 4 and 10%, and we want to see that too. So the answer is both, but we still want to see units and how they might go about a 4 and a 10% reduction. Number 7 is a question on layoffs. And this is an exercise. And what we would like is that in the narrative, please don't put any names, don't have conversations with people about layoffs. There is a different process for each of the three employment classifications. For instance, faculty, there is a whole process that fiscal emergency would need to be proclaimed. That's a 3-month process of review. It then needs to go to the Board of Regents. So there's a long process that's there. With university, with academic staff, and this is all covered under FASTLY, the Faculty Academic Staff Handbook, and it's all outlined there. There's a call to the fact that we should look at the project positions, temporary positions, and probationary positions first. And with university staff, there's a whole nother process, and that is in Gen Op 13. I didn't bring my cheat sheets with me. So I know that it's in Gen Op 13. So we do know that in this process of putting down the numbers on the spreadsheet, that there's a lot of positions that are very heavy in personnel. And in that process of putting down this, it's like, well, there's a person in this position. Do you know that that's going to result in a layoff? We want you to note that on the narrative, but we are not wanting anyone to have conversations about layoffs, okay? Number 8. So I'm putting the reduction numbers on the attached spreadsheet, and in doing so, I'm confused. Is this for the current fiscal year or the next fiscal year? It's also a very common question that we've gotten. Approach this as if you're cutting for the next fiscal year. As those narratives and budget cuts come in, we'll take a look at it, and we'll be able to identify if there's any way that we can capture savings in the current year. The important thing to appreciate on this is that we do have a structural deficit right now here today. And while we're working at reducing for the next fiscal year, we also are trying to look at reductions in this year. And it really goes right into that next question about when we were talking in the budget forum about 1.5 million this year and 1.5 million next year. Just the 4% that we're doing in this exercise, it really results in the $3 million reduction for the next fiscal year. So that's what we're trying to achieve. The 4% isn't across the board, but we're also asking people to do 10% because we want to identify other places, because there's a recognition that not every unit's going to be able to digest a 4% cut, like not every unit's going to be able to be able to do that like other units. I think I could have said that better, but I think you get the... And then finally, one last question that wasn't in the PowerPoint, and that really is about, so we knew that these cuts needed to be made last year. Why didn't we get at it and on it last year and get a head start at it? And that's really a misnomer. So the thing that we're dealing with here today is the 400 student reduction from the previous year. The system gave us 1.2 million. Patrick gave 600,000 from last year. Chancellor Meyer gave 600,000. No, from their accounts. But if we would have hit our enrollment numbers, if we would have been flat to slightly up, we would not be going through this exercise. 400 students, each of those students pays about $10,000. Of that $10,000, approximately $7,000 is tuition, and the $7,000 times the 400 is the $3 million that we're trying to cut. So the idea that the cuts have been out there and we didn't do anything about it. If you go back to the 2018 budget forum, You'll recall that at the end of that, we said, you know, we have a small structural deficit. We have the balances to be able to cover this for this year, but we want to see where enrollments are going next year. And if enrollments come in flat to up, then we don't have the problem. If they go down again, we do have a problem. And I guess my warning is that if those enrollments go down yet again, this isn't the end of this wouldn't be the end of the budget reduction. So on that really happy up note, we'll take some questions.
And Phil, maybe if I could just add, so one issue definitely is enrollment, and that's a key issue. The other piece, though, in terms of the planning, was, if you recall, way back when the budget was being formulated, the governor's proposal, as well as the Board of Regents, was for a $107 million increase. We ended up with 45 million, and if you take away the pay plan increase, it was really 29. So if we had gotten close to what the governor had recommended, we'd be in a very different situation too, as in terms of the deficit. So just wanted to be clear about that as well.
Push the mic right by you and it will light up.
And Glendali is here as well, and she will be more than happy to come up when there's a question related to academic affairs or the provost. So.
I'm going to start. It's okay. So one of the questions I just got maybe half an hour ago was from someone that gets an email with the numbers for next year, students' numbers, admitted, and you know the numbers are up, if I'm not mistaken, right? So the question was, if we cut, some numbers are up. So if we end up with more students and we do this now, are we going to run into the same reverse problem? We're going to start hiring people. So where is it that we can actually, I mean, this is ups and downs, and we've played with this for a long time, right? Why is it this different than any of the other ones?
I could give a start of an answer to that. I think, first of all, the numbers, you have to be a little cautious with looking at the enrollment numbers. One thing that we did this year was a free application week with the idea of mimicking Minnesota, and we had something like 1,300 applications almost, and normally in that week we would get 250. So there is a blip in there that is really good and, you know, positive, but I think we have to be somewhat cautious about that. The other element is that we know for sure that our current sophomore and junior class are considerably smaller than they've been. And we know, we hope, that those students are going to continue with us for at least a couple more years. And consequently, it's pretty clear that we're going to continue to have that as a drag on our enrollment numbers. So from my perspective, I think it's safer to approach it that way, to look at the reductions. Some of these things we're not planning to implement until next year, and we'd have the opportunity to make adjustments. But if we don't plan, and we're 3 million this year and we're somewhere near that, we won't have the reserves to basically meet our budget. So right now we're at the planning stage. We'll have more information as we get closer, but again, I'm worried that bringing a new chancellor in, if we say, surprise, you know, here's $3 million that we need to find quick, that's not going to put them in as good a place to be successful as if we at least have a plan going forward. And the other thing I would say is, in terms of the reductions, there's potential opportunity there. So let's say that we make reductions and that those are, no matter what, likely to be somewhat painful. But if we find that we have some additional revenue or our expenses are lower than anticipated, it does provide some opportunities for looking at where we might invest that money to further strengthen the institution. So I think there's that benefit as well. And Phil, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I would have gone right to the cycling. So you have to cycle those lower classes out every year. And I remember back in 2011, 2012, our freshman classes were fine, but we were graduating these huge classes from 2008 and 2009. I saw Maria here. Yeah, and I remember sitting in a meeting with you when we were talking about enrollment growth, and we were hitting some record freshman numbers, how can our enrollments be down? And it didn't have anything to do with the freshman numbers. It was this huge 2008 class that graduated in 12, and then well, we had some retention issues too. So we've got to cycle now 2 years of lower numbers out of the system to be able to get back to a place where I think we feel a little bit more comfortable and where we're sitting on full-time enrollees.
We were only planning to take one question, so I'll keep going with the answer to this one. But I do think there's some other challenges as well. If you look at our online numbers, those have plateaued and actually gone down recently. Similarly, graduate numbers have gone down as well. And in general, there's more competition. And if you look at demographics in the upper Midwest, at best, it's going to be flat in terms of high school grads over the next few years. So, there are a number of headwinds, and I'm hopeful the numbers do look positive. The numbers certainly were positive this year, so I think that's an indication things are moving in the right direction. I wasn't serious about the one question, by the way.
I have tons. I mean, if you guys don't want to ask any. Up again? Okay. Another question I got from a faculty was, is the CIC meeting that you're going to have to talk about this, is that an open meeting and people can come? I mean, there's interest, so are you planning for that? I mean, or no?
That's something that, honestly, I haven't considered. We're planning to have it in the Chancellor's conference room, so there wouldn't be a huge amount of seating, but if there's interest, I think that's something we can consider. Kind of looking at our open records law expert there. And
somebody else asked questions. Yeah, last one.
So that's a good question, Nelu. Next, please. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question for us to address, so thank you.
At the budget meeting back in October, Phil, you were talking about how system campuses over the years have sort of played a game with what numbers they projected they were going to bring in for students each year, and that we were all playing the same game because we were all playing the same game, and you were thinking that that was going to shift now. Do you have a sense as to where we are for the coming year? Are we going to be putting in what seem to be more accurate numbers for what we actually project for students?
Yes. So what you're talking about is our tuition target and the process that we would go through for estimating what we were going to bring in tuition. What we recently discovered is that some institutions were quite high and would not make their tuition target and then had asked system to bail them out. And apparently that happened. We had never done that. And if anyone from systems out there listening, then but we have for a long time targeted a very realistic amount to slightly higher, because you don't want to guesstimate lower, because all of those dollars that system distributed over the years was done on something called a GPR fee, and that is our percent of the whole. So our percent of the whole UW system budget has been anywhere from about 3.8 to 4.1% of the total 102 tuition and state support. And so when system would come back with the fringe lapse or additional dollars from utilities or any sort of give back to the campuses, that was given back on the GPR fee formula. So all of the campuses were estimating their budgets higher to get that GPR fee higher, because that number was based on budgets, not actuals. So we had a meeting with Sean Nelson, it was Kim Curtis and I last Thursday. And the communication that they gave to us was they are going to be approaching this now on a smoothed actuals from previous years. So we do give them a number, but they're going to look to see if that number is in line with what they think it ought to be as well. So the answer is yes, the system is going to change, and we should be budgeting at a more all campuses should be budgeting at a more realistic number. We were, and sometime I think that 1 or 2 times were we under?
Well, whenever
Yeah, yeah,
we could have been higher.
yeah.
All right, here's one more. So I would say for me personally, when you're talking about the 102 and the fringe, I don't think that should be a departmental or even a unit's decision if the position is sent to the system or not. Right? I think we should caution about that, and I think that should be a chancellor's decision. So maybe everybody should go with the 15% for the planning purposes, and then you can make a decision. Because I think giving back an FTE, it's a right. I mean, it's something that you can not easily recover. Correct?
Well, we manage the fringe pool centrally, but units plan for it as well. And if you're moving a position from 102 to 131, and you can capture the 38%, but you're moving it, and for some odd reason, somebody has they're single, they're not married, they're young, the cost of that health insurance is going to be much lower than somebody that is married with a family. So I understand what you're saying, and the fact that smoothing it out would potentially, well, it centralizes the FTE, and I think you have that centralized anyway to some extent. So we can think about that. Do you have any?
We already kind of do that. You know, the unit gave it up, we may not. Right, and the other thing I'd say, Nelu, is that what we're asking people is not tell us what to do, rather give us some ideas about how we may make reductions. So if the department says we could give that FTE up, then we're going to look at that closely, but that wouldn't be the final word by any means, and it would ultimately be the chancellor's decision ultimately when it comes to the reductions. But it's really just trying to get people to think about options and alternatives and present those. And the intent of getting that feedback was to try to get it from people who are closer to the information. You know, at my level, it's harder to know some of those granular details that are really critical for knowing what we could make reductions with and what we couldn't. Either's going to ask about 6 more questions. Unless
No,
someone else
I would
does.
just make one comment, and maybe this is not representative of the other units, but I think it's good to do these both exercises at the same time. But I think because we're doing the departments now, I don't think people are focusing on the other one, or they suggest ideas too much. And if we can extend that a little bit, I mean, my plan when we had a department meeting was to have a conversation about maybe as a department, is there some idea that we can submit? And then second part, talk about our budget, you know. And it didn't go well because people are, I mean, you know, you have this already that you're thinking about the department and how to deal with the cuts. So extended that, or maybe reminding people there's an opportunity to, I don't know how much you're getting already, but is that feedback?
Meredith had mentioned that I think there were a couple hundred comments already. You're talking about the campus-wide feedback. Yeah, that there had been a couple hundred, I think, up to this point. And it goes through the 22nd, Friday, I guess. So we can certainly send out a reminder. I was looking to Doug, but he's not sitting there anymore. But yeah, I think that would be a good idea to send out a reminder. Anyone from this side of the room who's interested in asking a question?
Oh, there we go. Okay. So having the chancellor candidates here is a great opportunity, I think, for outside perspective. So I'm curious when it comes to increasing revenues, if through the presentations or other discussions, we got presented with any new ideas that we hadn't considered yet.
I'm hoping others will chime in here as well. But, you know, in terms of new ideas, I didn't personally hear anything that I thought was dramatically new and different, perhaps a little bit more focus. So one example of an idea that comes to mind was competency-based education, something that's been talked about, something that, you know, perhaps is worth some further consideration. I know there's been some discussion at some level. Extended campus has really been the system focus for that with their flex degrees, but that would be an example of something where I think there's potential opportunities, and I'm not sure if anyone else heard some other things that they might look toward.
I have some ideas, but they're not fully baked yet, so I don't really want to throw them out there quite yet.
But I think even in terms, you had mentioned it in the context of the chancellor candidates, right? And
Oh.
yeah.
One of the candidates mentioned something that wasn't necessarily a new idea, but I appreciated the focus of it. And that was, for example, we have our research fellows program, but that money isn't endowed right now. And just the importance of looking at endowments that don't necessarily fund a complete person, but just allow that sort of targeted 3-credit reassignment to really help us at a time when teaching loads are increasing. Like, to me, that was just something that triggered that we should be more intentional about that, rather than knowing that we do have some funds, but they're not necessarily long-term. So that was something that I gleaned.
So you've talked a little bit about the timeline. We're in a planning stage right now, and the survey is going to close soon. But overall, do you have a timeline for like when we believe that decisions will be made and moving forward into the next step? Kind of what's after this? What are we looking forward to?
The decisions will really need to be made in February. And one thing that I would anticipate is that whoever is going to be stepping into the chancellor position, if they're not physically here, that they would be engaged at some level in that process. I think that would be important. But the ultimate goal is for Red Book for next year, for our budget for next year, that we really have those reductions baked in. And Curtis can correct me if I'm wrong here, but March at some point is our deadline there. And so I think having it planned in February would be pretty important. And so by March 30th, for sure, we'd have to have our cuts figured out, yeah. Hey, Lou, any more questions?
Some of us can have this conversation somewhere else. No, I'm good.
Patrick, do you anticipate that a new person will be, the new chancellor will be starting in January? I guess most of us were thinking it was next fall, so.
I think the person for sure would start by summer,
Oh, okay.
and whether or not they would start any earlier than that, I don't know for sure. It was a question of interest to me, and in talking to the candidates, there was some variation in their flexibility. So I suspect it would be this summer, and that would be the final date. Like, I think it would really be in July sometime at the latest that people would come in. Whether someone would come in earlier, that part I'm not clear on. Tolerance of ambiguity, I heard, was a really good trait, so I'm trying to practice that myself. But yeah, so I'm operating on the idea that it would be summer, but it could be potentially earlier depending on how things worked.
Yeah, surround you.
Can't get away with it, Kim, sorry.
Okay. I had a question this morning from somebody about the VSIPs. Is the intention that the position, if a VSIP is accepted, would the position be refilled? And my response to them was, I think the intention is no, it won't, but there could possibly be some exceptions, just by the way it was phrased, is my assumption. Can you kind of discuss that?
Yes, we had consulted with the Office of General Counsel, so there is some legalese in there to leave options open. The idea in my mind would be there would have to be substantial savings, and in many cases that would mean not refilling the position. There might be situations in a unit where there would be a reorganization that led ultimately to cutting part of a position, and that might be sufficient as well. Not, we really don't know the contours of who will apply and what areas they're in and what flexibility there is within the units. So we're trying to be as flexible as possible, but if it was a reduction where we'd hire a new person in that role and they make $1,000 less starting, that wouldn't probably fit the substantial long-term reduction that we'd be looking at.
Regarding the VSIP timeline, is that structured such that you would absolutely know those that are awarded and accepted, it's done before Red Book is due? Is that kind of the idea? So that you're not Red Booking for that body?
My understanding is the timeline is really determined by something beyond campus, and I can't remember quite the deadline, but there's a certain period of time that's allowed then for people to make a request for the voluntary separation. I think that's a month.
45 days.
45 days. And then there's a period after that for consideration and notification. And then following that notification, the person has a period of time before they need to sign the document. And after they sign the document, they have a period of time where they can still back out. I think that last one's 7 days. So the timing in the ideal world would have been for Red Book, but it's really driven by system requirements, as I understand it, for voluntary separations and the time required. So that I don't think we're quite there, knowing that May 31st is the absolute deadline. I
Right.
don't think that we'll know for sure for Red Book. It is. In the ideal world, if we could, roll the tape back a little
Right,
ways, that would have been a good thing to do, but it wasn't possible. Bonnie, do you want to try to sneak one in here?
So the tech fee funding strings are listed on our sheets that we got showing 4% and 10% on. Since we really can't cut anything from a tech fee funding string, do we need to cut those amounts from other funding strings within the unit?
I've told them that they just
I want to come over to the mic too.
I've told them just to ignore, just not to do anything with those funds, that they shouldn't count that as a part of their 4 and 10% reduction. It's not base funding, so they should kind of extract it out.
Okay, one more question. Regarding use of fringe as part of the cuts, if we reduce state payroll or LTE, are those positions eligible for the 15.75% fringe rate reduction?
State payroll, the student work? No. With 1%, 2%? Okay. College work study? Okay. But there's a portion of federal work, right? Okay.
And maybe another comment about that. So in terms of the reductions, one of the dangers, one of the concerns I had was that by putting a really specific number like 4% or 10% on there, that people are going to say, like, that's all, and I don't have to, think about anything other than 4 and 10%. And in reality, and so, hindsight's 2020, but the idea was really to create a framework for providing ideas. So if you're looking at a reduction that might be a part of a position or whatever, we wouldn't need you to get to the penny in terms of, that's exactly 4%. It would be more, here's kind of a framework. This is why we're looking at it. 4% really represents if we did across the board, which we're not planning to do. 10% provides some flexibility where we could cut more in some areas than others. But ultimately, whatever's submitted, we're going to take that and look at that and consider that carefully. If it's not exactly 4%, that's fine. It's not all coming down to the exact dollar we recognize, just the way that if it's a position, for example, that's not going to be a number that's to the exact dollar. So I really appreciate the thought. Just the questions that Phil had gotten really suggest that people have really been thinking about this carefully. But it's primarily, in my mind, a goal of just getting feedback and ideas that we can use to do a better job with the reductions than otherwise we would do if we just did it at the 30,000-foot level and said we should cut X, Y, or Z. So again, I don't mean to discourage the very careful thinking. I think that's great, but please don't lose too much sleep over it. If you're, $2 under 4% or $10 over 10%, that's not the level of detail that we really need.
Patrick, all the words like reduction and such carry negative connotations. Is there anything positive that we can say to the campus now to kind of offset this? We can't make money grow out on trees, but are there positive messages at all that we can send?
I think I'm not supposed to answer no, right? Yes. So, and Bob, I really appreciate you asking that question because yes, I think there's a tremendous number of really positive things happening, even in the financial side. For example, if you look at the comprehensive campaign, that's way exceeded expectations. And one of the comments that we're trying to figure out how to message that, frankly. But I think one of the messages I've heard that I thought was really a positive one is that we underestimated the generosity of our benefactors. And I think that's a really positive thing, that people were even more generous than we anticipated, both alumni and others. So I would consider that a real positive. Another one from my perspective is in a really challenging environment, our freshman enrollment has increased. If you look across the system, we had the largest percentage increase of any institution. And I think that's a really positive sign for the future. Also, I think that efforts that are being made right now to think about the future and how we might position ourselves better as the way that students are interested in getting their education changes. Clearly, Stout has been a leader in terms of online delivery. We probably need to further refine how we're doing some of that. And I know there's a lot of good conversation happening about that. So those are three positive things I have. I don't know if anyone else has any positive thing, but thank you again for that question.
So Bob, our friends at System, as a part of the capital planning process, took some statistical probabilities of our programs and where we are in the state. And they did it for every UW institution. And very few institutions made their modeling as having increased enrollments. We did. So I think we have programs that people want, and we're sitting in a place in the state that's got a high population area a little bit to the west that I think is an advantage for us in being able to grow our student population. Milwaukee, Stevens Point, Platteville, Parkside, they were all down, in some cases, double digits, and we were up. So, we've been here a long time. We've got good programs, and these kind of things come in waves. It's not that we can't, it's not that we shouldn't work to get students here, but if you believe in some of the underlying elements that went into this modeling, there was a bright side to that. So it gave, some hope.
I can't help myself. I have one more positive thing to throw in for good measure. But another good example that really is important on the enrollment side is retention. So obviously it's not just bringing students here, we need to keep them here. And for fall of 17, if I'm getting these correct, the cohort that started then, the retention rate was about 68%. For the students who started fall of 18, so then would be sophomores this current fall, that retention rate was about 72%. And we haven't even implemented Navigate, the EAB program. So I think there's a real positive too, where if we can continue to do some of those things, and probably part of it was MentorLink that provided peer-to-peer mentoring, but some other things as well. I think that there's a real opportunity for growing retention, improving retention, and that will make a big difference long-term as well. Absolutely.
So, in terms of a couple of things that I'd like to comment that are positive, if anybody attended the Cabot executive presentation this week, just thought it was a wonderful example of bringing in someone who, other than having a relative who works here at Stout, really didn't know very much about Stout until she came. And she spent not only one day, but several days on campus and interacted with employees from all categories, students, alumni, donors. And she's actually marketing for Stout now on her private company's webpage. And just to me, just having that breath of fresh air, someone who just came in and reminded me and kind of just thanked everyone that she got to meet with, was just a reminder of how special Stout is and what great work we're doing. The other piece I would say is I've attended one department meeting and one college meeting as these conversations have been going on. And in both cases, just the amount of just communication that's occurring and trust that I think is shown through those conversations, I find really inspiring. And specifically at a meeting that I attended yesterday, there were instructors talking about units outside of their unit and how important it is to preserve the work that they're doing. So hearing someone, right, not just advocating for why they should be, it wasn't about them. It was like, and by the way, I want to put a call out to this unit and that unit because they support me in the classroom. And so I really appreciated that and thought that, that part of that goal, although there is a specific number that people were targeting, it was examples of people doing what we were really asking, like what are creative ideas? How can we kind of work our way to address this cut? But more importantly, what are those principles and values for the institution? And who are those other people that really help us do what we do? So for me, it was a couple of really small but very important nuggets and have kept me really, inspired to kind of keep this conversation, this difficult conversation going, and we'll have more opportunities for communication.
Patrick, I would add just a personal preference in terms of sharing the feedback back to the campus as you make decisions, and I know it's easier to wait for the entire 3 million to be done, but I think being that it's over the winter and that the most you can share early, or if the decisions are made for some portions of the cut, I think that would be really appreciated. So, because usually this piece of information starts leaking, and then some people know, some people don't, and then I think having openness, I think it's key to successful.
And if we haven't done so already, we'll have a SharePoint or some kind of means of having some documents available. So that would at least be one mechanism. It was really hard not to laugh seeing what just happened. But yeah, that's really a good point, and I think that we can work hard to try to do that. So yeah, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate your time and look forward to continuing the discussion. And next time, I'll have to make sure that I do pay someone else $20 to ask that really great softball question about what some good things are. So thank you.
How was that?